Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, and welcome to our Voices of Passover service today. We're excited. This is a part of our Voices of series. We're excited. This is our second occasion to gather. Last year, we were able to do Voices of Ramadan, which was a success. And so we want to continue that in celebrating our staff and celebrating the religious diversity at Wake Med here and in our community. As we get started, I wanted to say this first. I learned this quote recently, and I was like, that's so true. It's by George Bataille in his book, The Theory of Religion. He says that religion is the search for a lost intimacy.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh my goodness. It just it sank somewhere deep in me. And I think that's so true, and why this series is so special and important and powerful, because we get to search for that lost intimacy together and hear how our Jewish sisters and brothers do it, hear how other communities do it, and so I invite you into that lost intimacy today. I also want to do some formalities and thank lots of good people who make today possible, to our executive leadership who continue to celebrate and champion spiritual care and religious diversity in our community, to the Diversity and Inclusion Committee who are represented here today. Yeah. Members who are here, to Temple Beth Orr and Lexi who's here with us, and also to our staff who are here, Rebecca and Susan. We're grateful to have you. And then finally, but not least of all, I want to give a big thank you to our staff chaplain here who made today possible, organized all of this, and that's Andy Ross. Andy. So without further ado, Andy, welcome. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Shalom and welcome to Voices of Passover. As Jeremy told you, this series is about lifting up the religious diversity here at Wake Med and our surrounding community. And the way we do that is by lifting up the voices themselves, by listening, by paying attention, and by entering into conversation with those who engage in these traditions, with those who feel so strongly and intimately about them. So we're so very excited. I'm so very excited to be here today. Let me just tell you, with our three voices, each individually, I had planned to talk them in to doing this event. So I talked to them each individually on the phone, and 5 minutes before I was supposed to call them. Yes, I'm like that. So I'm supposed to call them at 1 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. So 5 minutes before I'm in the office, I shut the door, and I start going through the spiel. This is what I'm going to say to them to convince them to be a part of this event, to convince them how awesome it's going to be, and to convince them that this is worthy of their time. So the time hits, I make the phone call, each individually, they don't know about each other yet, and we start talking. And we just start talking. And 5, 6, 7 minutes into the conversation, I have not convinced them of a thing. They have convinced me how wonderful this is going to be. They have convinced me. They have shared their passion, their compassion, and their desire to express this faith tradition and this festival that's so important to them. So I didn't say a word to get them here. When we were done talking, I was like, okay, so this is what we're going to do. And they were like, yes. So I'm very, very thankful to have them here today. We can give them another hand if you don't mind. So without further ado, you don't want to see any more of me. Let's begin with our first voice, Lexi. Lexi Newell is the Director of Music and Community at Temple Beth Orr in Raleigh. Originally from Kansas City. Which one? Kansas or Missouri?
I grew up on the Kansas side.
Originally from Kansas City, Kansas, she came to North Carolina in 2007 and has been blessed to serve Temple Beth Orr for the last 16 years. You look so much younger than that. She and her husband Isaac are the proud parents of 3 daughters. I give you Lexi.
Thank you, Andy. And it's so good to be back. I'm not a stranger to Wake Med, but it's been a while. I did 2 units of CPE with spiritual care. It's been a lot of years ago, but it's a wonderful experience. And I'm excited for the opportunity to get to talk to you about Passover. if I asked you the question about Judaism, what is the biggest holiday for Jews in the year? I'm guessing, I won't poll you because I'm guessing the answer probably would be Hanukkah. And that's a good answer. Hanukkah is very fun, but Hanukkah is actually, it's a lesser festival in the year, and it gets a lot of play, a lot of airtime because of its proximity to Christmas. And with diversity and inclusion, and we appreciate it, it gets a lot of airtime just because of how close it is, but our biggest holiday of the year, probably without question, though my friends who are up here may agree or disagree, and that's a very Jewish thing too. Passover is the thing. It's our biggest holiday of the year. And to give you a very brief overview, so here's a story of Passover in a nutshell. The Israelites were slaves in Egypt. Pharaoh, who was the ruler of the day, believed that Israelites could soon outnumber the Egyptians and commanded that the firstborn son of every Israelite family be drowned in the Nile. One of these firstborn sons was named Moses. And Moses was actually rescued by Pharaoh's daughter as he came down in his basket in the Nile River, and he was raised by her. Now, Moses grew up and eventually would become the hero of our Passover story. As an adult, he pled with Pharaoh over and over to let the Jews be free. And every time that Pharaoh said no, God brought another plague over the land of Egypt. And the plagues were pretty harrowing. God turned the water into blood, it rained frogs, afflictions of lice and flies and locust. God brought livestock pestilence, crippling hail, and at the last of all the plagues, brought the killing of the firstborn son. And our holiday gets its English name from that last plague. As the killing of the firstborn son took place, God instructed the Israelites to mark their doors with the blood of the sacrificial lamb, that God might pass over their homes, saving their firstborn son. And we're taught that Pharaoh's own son was killed in that final plague, which spurred him to finally agree the Israelites could go free. But no sooner did they make a break for it, but Pharaoh changes his mind. Those of you who are familiar with the story know, and a chase ensues. And they reach the shores of the Red Sea, and Moses strikes his staff into the sand, and the Red Sea parts, and the Israelites cross to dry land with two walls of water on their right and on their left. And as soon as Pharaoh's army enters the water, we're taught the Red Sea closes, and they're swallowed up, and the Israelites are free. Free to a really long time of wandering, but that's where our story, that's where this part of the story is. So Passover is a very unique holiday in our tradition in that it's celebrated almost entirely in the home. There aren't Passover services at your synagogue or your temple, unlike other major holidays like you may have heard of the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, or the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Now these are very big holidays, but they're celebrated in the temple. Instead, we celebrate Passover at our home or the homes of our friends or family with a special narrative-filled dinner called a Seder. Have any of you been to a Seder before? I bet you have, some of you. It makes it especially appealing to secular American Jews as well as observant Jews. The Passover Seder commemorates the story that we just heard of the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt. Passover is about a week long, and throughout the holiday, many Jews observe special dietary rules. The big one, for the most part, means we don't eat anything with leavening. Specifically, we don't have bread, we don't have cake, we don't have crackers, except a lot of matzah. In my house, this causes a lot of strife because 3 of the 5 of us have April birthdays. So somebody is going to land with a Passover birthday and ice cream cake instead of cake made of flour. But we teach our children about, and adults, eat a whole lot of matzah. Have you had matzah before? It's a kind of bland, very large cracker, and it represents how quickly the Israelites had to make that exodus in the middle of the night. They had to flee slavery in Egypt, and that their dough did not have time to rise. So we teach our children that they patted it nice and flat, and it cooked on their backs with the heat of the sun as they fled. So that is what that matzah cracker represents, and we eat it all throughout Passover. The first day you might be, the nostalgia of eating it feels pretty good. By the last day, no one wants matzah for a full calendar year. So we believe that Passover, in particular the Passover Seder, is the most widely observed Jewish tradition among American Jews today. According to the Pew study, 70% of American Jews said that they participate in a regular Seder, while nearly half, or only half, say that they fast the 25 hours of Yom Kippur, our Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur being our often referred to as our holiest day of the year, but only half observing there. And then just 23% say that they even attend a Shabbat service, our Sabbath service, even once monthly. So 70% participation for Passover is a pretty big deal. And it's because Passover is this holiday that's celebrated in the home rather than in the synagogue. And most Jews feel comfortable, regardless of how observant they are, because each Seder, each of those narrative meals, reflects their own tradition and not that that's prescribed to them, which is a big selling point for Jews who may not participate in other holidays during the year. Passover can be what your family brings to it. So we know the central theme of Passover is the story of freedom. And many modern Jews, Passover is a time to be cognizant of the suffering of others and to understand modern oppression as a reminder of the enslavement of the ancient Israelites. And the hope for Jews today is that all those who are oppressed will someday find freedom, just like the Jews who were freed from Egypt. For me personally, Passover means a lot because it centers around my family. I've worked in the synagogue and synagogues in general for 20 years, and that means almost every single Shabbat or Sabbath, I'm at services on Friday night, I'm at services on Saturday morning. For our high holy days, the holiest days of the year, I'm on the altar then too, and I can look at my kids in the pews, but I don't get to be with them. So since Passover is almost exclusively in the home, it's, for my husband and me, our opportunity to make memories and have fun Jewish experiences with our kids while passing on the oral tradition of our faith, which is the cornerstone. We believe that Judaism is an oral tradition. Something to consider for those of you who work in a hospital setting, and I found this in my time working as a chaplain here at Wake Med, is just how hard it can be for a patient who identifies as a Jew to be in the hospital during Passover time. More so than the high holidays, more so than Hanukkah, Passover is the holiday that most Jewish families observe together, the holiday that you might come from out of town or have someone come to you. So to miss it because you're ill, it stings a little bit more. It's also hard to replicate outside of the home, even though it's something that I know spiritual care is aware of. When I was here in the hospital setting, little things like having kosher for Passover matzah, or even Passover candy, might mean something serious to somebody who's here and did with the Jewish patients that I encountered. And as we all know, everybody appreciates being seen and feeling understood, and those little things can go a long way. So I want to share with you, and Andy asked, I'm also the music director at our synagogue, and one of the pieces that, I know I just told you that every Seder would be completely different based on your family's tradition, but the two pieces I brought to you today are the ones that you would be most likely to hear at any Seder you went to. So I want to teach you a word. You repeat after me, Dayenu.
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 And Dayenu means it would have been enough. It would have been enough if God had just freed us from Egypt. It would have been enough if God had just given us the Sabbath. It would have been enough if we had just been given the Torah. But God's goodness knows no limits. So we sing Dayenu. And I'll take care of the verses, but let's all sing those Dayenus together. And the Dayenu part, I'll sing it to you, and then let's try it together, and we'll sing a couple of verses. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. I think we could try it together. It's just Dayenu, you got it, but we grow with intensity every time. It would have been enough, it could have been enough, it would have been enough. And then we start it again. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Idu natana tananu natananu et hashava natananu et hashava Dayenu. Here we go. Dayenu.
I need a minute. Clap some more, please. It would have been enough if you just came. It would have been enough if you just told a story. It would have been enough, but you sang to, man. Just makes me so happy. Okay, our next voice, Rebecca. Rebecca Kepler is a married mother of 2 energetic boys. She works as a licensed clinical social work case manager for WKCC. What is WKCC?
Wake Med Key Community Care.
Wake Med Key Community Care for the last year. Rebecca has over 12 years of medical social work experience. Rebecca also, that wasn't enough, Rebecca also teaches religious school at Congregation Judea Reform every week to preschool and kindergarten students. She enjoys painting kindness rocks and being in nature. Rebecca has a passion for cultural competency and being a safe place for anyone who needs it. I'll give you Rebecca.
Thank you. So I'm kind of just winging it. We were listening to the story, and one of the most impactful things for me about Passover is the family. And something I've learned as an adult about the Passover story was when Moses' mother had the baby and realized that she was potentially going to have to throw him into the river, she put him into a basket, as she said, and asked his sister to follow the basket. And so his sister follows the basket, and they see the Pharaoh's daughter take the baby out. And Miriam, his sister, goes over and says, I know a person who just recently had a baby and can nurse the baby for you. And so you talk about inclusivity, you talk about family, and you talk about a mother's quest to keep her child safe. And so his mother came and she nursed him. And while she was nursing him, she told him the stories about being Jewish. Because I always wondered, how did Moses get so connected to the Jewish people that this person who is raised by the Pharaoh speaks up when he sees somebody doing something wrong? And that's the other part of the story. He was walking through, he saw somebody abusing one of the Jewish slaves, and he spoke up. And he said to them not to do it, and ended up causing a lot of problem, making him leave Egypt, and then he comes back and he gets us free. But for me, the fact that a mother, like, that's something that's so impactful. Now that I'm a mother, it even has more of an impact. And so for me, Passover's always represented family. We've always had family time. I think of my grandmother prepping the Seder, and the Seder has a lot of symbolism. You know, you have salt water for tears, and we dip in salt water to symbolize the tears of the Egyptian slaves, the Jews in Egypt. And, you know, we have parsley to symbolize life. We have all of these amazing symbolisms. And my grandma would get everything ready, and we'd watch it, and, you know, we would get all excited. And one of my favorite stories from Passover was a story that made us always laugh. Now, as children, they hide one piece of the matzah. It's called the afikomen. And so you go and you try to find it, and you get a reward if you find it. But one of the best traditions is if you get to open the door for Elijah. Elijah is a prophet. They set a wine glass out for Elijah. And you get to go to the door and you get to open it. We were always like, oh, who's going to get to open the door? But we were 4 mischievous children. My children come by this honestly. And we would always kind of try to set up traps. How are we going to catch Elijah? Like, we're going to catch this invisible prophet, and he's not going to be able to do anything. We're going to get him, right? And so we're always conspiring, like somebody would stick their foot out to try to trip him. Do we put trip wires out? How are we going to catch him? And always really paying attention to the wine to see if it goes down. And so one day, my grandfather says it, and he was a very boisterous voice, you know, and he says, Baruch Abor, which is our symbol to open the door. And we open the door, and in walks their cat. So we were all like, oh, there's Elijah. And it was a good laugh for the family. But just that was my funny story from Passover when I was younger. But I really love the symbolism of Passover. Like you said, we invite friends over. It's one of the things my family does to kind of teach Passover to people so that people know. And I think we talk about cultural competence. And Andy asked, you know, what do we do to serve Jewish people better when they're in the hospital at Passover or at any time? And I think it's the same thing no matter what kind of culture you're dealing with. And you don't know somebody's culture by looking at them. You know, you don't know who they are or what they celebrate, who they are or what they're about. So the biggest thing to do to serve people in our community when they're here is say, how does this matter to you? Mm-hmm. How do you celebrate? Because every single Jewish family celebrates different. And so that's what makes it so significant to us is we each have our own celebrations, but every single Jewish family does everything they practice differently, which goes with the arguments as well, you know? So it's like, do your matzo balls float or do they sink? You know, it's a huge debate. So it's the same with all people. You know, it is. It's a big deal. I quite frankly think they should float, but we won't start that controversy right now. No argument. You know, if you like sinkers, it's fine. But basically, anytime you meet somebody, if you just ask questions, it's the best way to be inclusive. You know, how do you celebrate? What is the most impactful thing for you? And how may I help you today to make it good? And I think that is the biggest way to make a difference with any culture, and everybody would be appreciative. I would never be offended if you say, you know, I've noticed you identify as Jewish. How can I help support that? I would much rather you say that than assume you know, like, I don't keep kosher, so I don't want you to assume that I'm going to keep kosher. You know, just ask me. And I think that for me is the biggest impact. And just remembering, like you said, it is, in my eyes, one of the things we definitely are most observant about is we get our Passover, we get our family, we bring in friends, and we just celebrate and enjoy. So thank you for having us here and letting us share our stories with you.
Exercise those hands. Seriously, exercise those hands. What can I do good for you today? What good can I do for you today? What a great question. All right, our final voice, Susan. Originally from Florida, Susan Blumenthal decided to move to North Carolina in 2008, and we're very lucky to have you. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in biochemistry from Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, her Master of Medical Science degree in Physician Assistant Studies from Northeastern University in Boston. She was introduced to oncology by a personal friend who happened to be an oncologist. Here she is, 19 years later, and you look younger than that as well. I feel like I have to say that because you look young as well. 19 years later and loving the work that she does. Susan treats all cancer types, but has a special interest in breast cancer survivorship, integrative oncology, palliative care, and patients in active oncology treatments. I give you Susan.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having us. This is a wonderful treat. My practice became part of WakeMed just this past October, so I'm new to the WakeMed system and loving it. So it's always wonderful to be able to speak about my faith, especially in this area. Growing up in Southwest Florida, you kind of take your faith as, you know, being Jewish for granted, and then I was up in New Jersey for many years, in Massachusetts, and same thing. You don't really think about your faith because a lot of people around you share your faith. So in a sense, you take it for granted. So moving down here, it makes you pay attention a little bit more. And working in an office, you know, as the only Jewish person for my basically entire career, it makes you think. So I appreciate this forum to be able to talk with others and hear from others. So I have to start with your story about Elijah, because growing up with two other sisters, we would always race to the door to open it for Elijah, leaving my mom and usually the other adults at the table. And the front door was a little bit off from the dining room. So by the time we got back to the dining room, the wine was always gone, and not like a little bit, like it was gone. Yeah. And we're like, oh, we missed him again. How'd this happen? And honestly, I was much older than I should have been before I realized what was really happening. So that's my Elijah story. So with that said, I grew up with, you know, a single mom, and we were always with family for Passover, friends, other community members, and it was always a big thing. You'd have card table lined up at the dining room table with some bar stools here and some cushions over here, like you just sat wherever. And it was just all about being together and sharing the story and sharing delicious food. And if you guys don't know a whole lot about Jews, we love our food.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also half Italian, so it doesn't help.
It does help, actually.
So again, when we moved here, you have to pay a little bit more attention to your traditions and your food. As for example, Passover starts on the 5th of April, and today is the 15th. I started my shopping because it's hard to find. And if you're particular about some of the things that you only eat one time a year, because you can only handle it one time a year, but yet you gotta have it, you gotta start early. So I started today. I got Wegmans has, but not the one in Chapel Hill because that one's too far, but didn't have. So anyway, long story. So that's how you do it. You start today, this year, and then as often happens, Passover falls over spring break. So some years we're home and some years we have family who's also on spring break and we're all together. Some years we have family over. Some years we're over at other family. Some years we're on vacation. This year we'll be on vacation. We'll be at a beach house. Great, don't have to clean my own house. I have packed everything up. We'll bring everything we need to have our Seder and we'll just do it away. It's easy, which is also great because the food that I bought today will not get eaten before we leave because it's being packed up. So for us, we do love the symbolism of a lot of the foods. There's one particular food called haroset, which is my all-time favorite.
My favorite too.
Same.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's basically, and you really have to question why we don't make it more often because it is
Yes.
the best. It's just chopped up apples, and you can peel it or not peel it. That's a debate. You add red wine, usually sweet Manischewitz wine, but again, it's another debate. You can make it with any kind of red wine. Honey, cinnamon, and chopped walnuts. So, and it's supposed to symbolize the brick and the mortar, that the slaves were making. So we have a family that has nut allergies, so we make 2 batches. And we have picky eaters, so we make a ton of it because everybody loves. Who doesn't like applesauce? And this is just a fancy version of applesauce. So we make 2 big batches, and we love it. So that we get to always have and always make, and we love having that. And we just enjoy whatever it brings. We love the story. We love the plagues. We talk about all the plagues that were brought down to Pharaoh. And there's usually different hand puppets that get thrown around, like the frogs, and the locusts, and the blood, and the boils,
Cows.
and the
Cows.
cows. And it's just fun, and you're together. And how often do you sit down with your family for a long time, not your just 20-minute eat and run kind of weekday dinner? And it's great. And my teens now take charge of things, and now we have an adult search for the afikomen, and whoever finds it doesn't have to clean up.
I am thinking that.
So it's awesome. It's better than that $5 the kids get when they find it. So everybody does things differently wherever we go. Every family, some seders, they will last 3 hours, and that's great, and you'll eat through the whole thing. Some years our Seder might be 20 minutes because, we got karate and then we've got track practice and we gotta go.
Yes.
This year we're so lucky because it's over for spring break, and we'll be on vacation, which means everybody's gonna be relaxed and nobody's gonna have other commitments. So it just kind of falls like that, and that's kind of where we are in our family right now. But I've seen everything and happy, every year's different.
Yeah.
So anyway, so thanks.
Where did the wine go? I bet if we keep clapping really loud, Lexi will sing us another song.
So I picked one as our closing song that I bet many of you know from your faith traditions too, or might have heard, even if it's not part of your faith tradition. It's in English. So I hope you'll sing it with me. This is Go Down Moses. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. And that's your part. Let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. We'll try the whole thing. When Israel was in Egypt land,
more round of applause for all of 3 voices. Don't you just want to sit in it? Just sit in it. So now it's time for our Q&A or question answer from our studio audience or for comment. So I'm going to turn it over. Yes, young lady in the back.
If you would you mention all of the different symbols that are consumed during the Seder?
Yep. So we have horseradish to symbolize the bitterness of being enslaved.
And the bitter herbs.
And the bitter herbs as well, yep. And then we have the salt water for the tears. We have an egg for life. The herosis for the
Brick and
mortar.
We have a shank bone.
Shank bone for symbolizing the putting the blood over the doors with the lamb shank.
I feel like we're forgetting
We are
the
forgetting
orange.
something.
The orange is interesting.
a modern,
It's in a
it's
modern,
Yes.
and it can either represent the female component or LGBT inclusion. So you find that more in, I'm guessing, since you're at Judea Reform, that we're all Reformed.
Reformed,
Jews.
yes.
So you find that more in Reform settings, but yeah, that's a modern symbol for inclusion in the.
I also learned a modern symbol of putting water out for Miriam.
Oh, we put more wine out.
Yep. Her house likes to drink.
The mortar, Paschal lamb, bitter herb, tears. I think
That's
we got
everything.
it. That's
I
everything.
think we got it all,
got
yeah.
it.
And there's also reclining.
Okay.
So we talk about, you're always teaching kids sit up straight, sit up straight. This is our opportunity to relax. So you think about we were enslaved, so they talk about reclining. So like people sit like this, and there's pillows and we're sitting more relaxed at the table versus sitting stringently strict and upright. So it's our chance to relax, which I think is pretty significant as well.
And it's one of the main themes of the Seder meal is we keep asking the question, what makes this night different from all other nights? And the opportunity to recline instead of being enslaved, that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to be relaxed. So that's one way we're reminded of that.
Yeah, and we have 4 questions that are asking those questions. And then they also have in the Passover Seder, they have, which we call the Haggadah. We have a thing that we read out of, and it's called the Haggadah. They also have the children who could, what do we say to the children who says, what does this mean to you? And by saying you, he's excluding himself from it. And what do you say to the child who cannot ask the questions? And how do you answer and tell them the story, for every different type of personality, which I think is so cool and was so impactful as a child. And then there's a lot of singing at the end and games, like we have a game about the goat. My dad, my father bought for Tuzism, and it's like you try to say this very long verse in one breath. So you start with one, and then you go and you add a layer, and it's almost like the woman who swallowed the fly, and you're going through and you add layers as you go. It's similar to that, but it's about a goat and that their father bought. And how can you get it in one breath? And it's so much fun for the kids because they're like, oh, I got to try to get it in, so.
I think fun is the emphasis. I tell a funny story about my first Passover in Raleigh. I was super young. I didn't know anybody, and the rabbi invited me to her home for Seder. And I thought, okay, this is going to be super traditional. And I dressed really formal. And we got there, and they opened the Seder with, take me out to the ball game, but take me out to the Seder. And I thought, I am so prepared for this to be traditional. But it's just every family, you can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah.
Their Seders will look different from my Seder, and they center around the same theme, but all of the components are different. Or you go to some families, there are 2 different kinds of well-known Judaism, those that come from Eastern Europe and different parts of Europe, and those that come with a Mediterranean background, which are Ashkenazim or Sephardim, and they'll have different customs based on where they've come from in the world. And I went to a Sephardic family Seder, and part of what they do is they have green onions, and they whip each other's legs with green onions as a reminder of their enslavement. Never seen it at another Seder, but it's just another example of each family brings what is meaningful to them to the Seder table, and what's a meaningful component of our oral history to pass to their children, so that will get passed again and again, as it has for generations before, to hopefully generations beyond.
And if you're looking for resources, there's an amazing site like PJ Library that they send out kids Haggadahs, And so it's kind of a brief version of what the Haggadah looks like. When we were younger, my grandfather was raised very religious, and so we were the 3-hour Seder. And so we didn't realize it was his last Seder, but we would be like, he always remembered the glass of wine. So he was starting to forget, but he always remembered how many glasses of wine he had. And we do 4 glasses throughout the Seder.
Full glass.
Small glasses.
Yes. Depending on who you are, see, full glass, small glass. We would do sips, so it just depended on who you are and where you are.
If you're really
But-
religious.
Yeah, really religious. Check the
I'm
whole
just
thing.
really religious.
So we were like, he was like, where are we? And we're like, oh, we're right before the first glass of wine because we were trying to get the Seder done quicker. So what normally would take 3 hours took 20 minutes, but by the end of it, Grandpa was passed out because he'd had 4 glasses of wine in 20 minutes, and he was sleeping at the Seder. So our last picture of the Seder is him sleeping, and we didn't know it was his last Seder, but it ended up being his last Seder. So it's such a memory that, and they all hold memories. You all have memories that are significant around the Seder. So
Say the name you said to
PJ Library.
So if I searched like Googled
Yeah, PJ Library, yeah.
PJ
And they're really
Library.
great for kids. So, like, even if you have kids, from my understanding, even if you have children that aren't Jewish, but you have children you want to learn more about Judaism, they send out free books. They're like the Dolly Parton Library, but they send out free books,
Every
and they're
month.
based around faith every month. And so, you know, you can learn. And another one is 18 Doors, I think, that teaches people who aren't Jewish more about Judaism in a kind of basic way so you can understand it.
Great question.
And then you'll find out whatever the symbol was we missed.
I feel like there is one we didn't get, but I couldn't.
And then the
celebrate.
sandwich of the
Sometimes we
bread,
have
the
Yeah, oh yeah, when you build the matzah sandwich with the haroset, the apple
Yeah.
side. That,
and then some people put horseradish in there because then it's easier. Oh, gefilte fish.
Yeah, this is
That's a side.
That's a side, which is-
Gefilte fish is a part. It's not part of the. It's just. It's not on the Seder table.
not a
It's not part of our
appetizer.
book. It's just in my opinion, disgusting.
Disgusting,
appetizer.
The best
disgusting.
thing ever.
It's,
See, 2 out of 3.
but it's mashed whitefish,
Whitefish, pike.
pipefish, and I
In a
mean,
jelly.
depending
It
on
sounds
your
gross.
family's
Don't
background, it is.
It's not in a jelly.
It is in a jar.
Sometimes it's broth.
But I mean, this is again, it depends on your family's tradition, but you can buy it at the grocery store, and then it does come in jelly in a jar. Or you might have a tradition in your family, like I've heard it from many congregants, that they have memories of their grandmother having the pike and whitefish swimming in their bathtub, and that they would go in and clog the fish to make it fresh because it's so much better fresh. I've had it both ways, and it's not my favorite either way, but but to each their own, and that every family brings their own tradition to what is mandatory. If you ask a room of Jews what's mandatory for Passover,
Every
every person
Red
would say
horseradish.
something different.
Yep.
And we like
Yep.
white.
We like
so-
white too.
Well,
Yeah.
Wegmans got both. So.
Well, and the other thing is you have to be cautious in this area. She grew up in South Florida, I grew up in Central Florida, so my area was predominantly Christian. And so I was the only Jew in all my classes. And I saw a picture where somebody was like, ham, kosher for Passover. Ham's never kosher, but particularly not for Passover. So you have to pay attention to make sure that it is kosher for Passover when you go shopping around here as well, which is something that if you grew up in a predominantly Jewish area, you would not be used to, you know?
Yeah, I get what one of you mentioned about with you asking the question about how can I be supportive of you. One of the things that I remember just from the internships that I did here was that there are not a lot of Jews that live in this area. In North Carolina, there are not a lot of Jewish people. We think there maybe are about 6,000 Jews, whether they affiliate or not, in all of Wake County. So it's just not a lot. But when you look at the census for Wake Med, it would appear that there are maybe a Jew at a time, sometimes two. And that may or may not be true, because what often happens is that when a Jewish person is asked, do you want to list your religion, when you check in, no thank you, because what could possibly come from that? Until I was a chaplain here, I thought the same, that so a Christian chaplain is going to come and do what for me? And I think that just
also fear.
asking the question, it's fear-based, because when you grow up in an area where there are no Jews, and there are other faiths where proselytizing is what is supposed to happen and what you're taught, there's a fear from Jews about, well, if I tell you I'm Jewish, is it my treatment going to be different if I say I'm
Yeah.
not interested in Jesus, or I don't want a prayer, or so I think being sensitive to that if you do see that somebody's listed as a Jew, that she's exactly right. Make no assumptions about even the things that we told you today. And a Jewish patient may have a completely different understanding, and particularly in Reform Judaism, it is called Reform and not Reformed with a D because we not reformed because we are constantly reforming and deciding what works for us as individuals.
Yeah.
So asking that question and being open to whatever the answer is, asking a question and not knowing ahead this needs to be the answer that I will be accepting, just knowing that the answer could be anything, and it's my job as a spiritual care person to help facilitate or to make options available.
Yeah. And I think there is a large fear base of even anti-Semitism. Because, my family lived in North Carolina a very short period of time, and it was back, I don't know, I think 40 years ago, 50. Well, no, I'm almost 50, so it's probably 60 years ago.
No, you're
Yeah,
not.
I'll be 47 this year. So probably about 60, 70 years ago, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism. So when they found out that I was moving up to North Carolina, they're like, be careful, don't make it known who you are or what you are, And so, again, along with the closed-mindedness, where a lot of times you get people who say things that you wouldn't expect, there's the, what if that person treats me differently because of the fact that I'm Jewish? And, we are fortunate in the sense that it's easier for us to hide than other people who aren't able to hide who their identity is. But it's kind of disheartening to me that a lot of people do hide that, because I proudly pronounce who I am. But if it were my child, I may not tell you that he's Jewish. I'm proud to pronounce it for myself, but I would hide it from my children to make sure that they get treated fairly.
And anti-Semitism is on the rise. I mean, you see that, unfortunately, in the news, that from where we were 10 years ago, we were talking at the temple the other day where I work about anti-Semitism is up 100% from instances that we were seeing 10 and 20 years ago, that we constantly have conversations about security. Yeah. And that was something that was not true in the beginning of my career. So in a situation where you're already vulnerable, being ill or injured or whatever, to add another layer of vulnerability, that will I be accepted? Will I be heard? Will I be seen for who I am? Or is that something that I need to mask while I'm here? It's such a gift that you can provide by letting somebody know that I see you and you are safe here.
A question, I'll be a part of our studio audience. How would you begin? Let's say you're a little bit nervous about approaching someone in the hospital and asking that question or asking more about them, because you don't want to come off, you don't want to stoke that fear, you want to give them their space as well. What are ways that we can begin that conversation? What ways can we broach that topic if maybe we've seen it in a census, or one of the people we're working with says, I think this family is Jewish. What would you suggest in beginning that conversation if we're a little nervous?
Well, I think like anybody you meet that, you're going to start it off, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you,
Wait, what?
Tell me something.
Blowing my mind.
Tell me something that's
myself?
significant to you that I need to know in your care that's going to help you. Because if they don't want to identify, they're not going to want to identify. So you may say, I think that they might be Jewish, but they may not want to identify it. Just how can I help you? What is the best way to make you feel comfortable? Is there anything in particular I need to know to make you feel more comfortable? A big thing, people who keep kosher, I think it would be really hard here to get kosher food, and so because you have to cook it, so there's like such particular rules around it, and so we are all Reform. But, people who are more religious, you're going to know that they're Jewish. There's not any hiding it. A lot of them will have their yarmulkes on, or they'll have tzitzit. I'm going to say it wrong, but the little ropes that are hanging off, they're called tzitzit. You're going to know that they are Jewish, but for them, there are so much more rules often. And I want to precede that with often, because they may have rules that they usually follow that they don't. I have a patient who's Orthodox. She was raised Orthodox. She moved here, and she was talking about her difficulty in finding kosher food. We had coordinated her with a meal delivery service that said they would deliver kosher meals, and the first meal she got was a cheeseburger, which is completely not kosher. You don't mix dairy and meat. And so she was talking to me, and knowing that I was Jewish, even though I wasn't Orthodox, she said, I know that this is going to be really difficult to follow, and I want to give my mother the best care. I wonder what I should do. And so with our rules, and we were talking about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we fast. We fast from sunset to sunset, but there are, in every single branch of Judaism, there are rules where a person over a certain age does not have to fast. A person who is diabetic does not have to fast. If you're pregnant, you do not have to fast. So the main mitzvah, which is a good deed or a rule following what God's teachings are, is your own health. And so I told her, if it's, as well as I do, if you don't fast during Yom Kippur, or you don't fast, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you don't fast, it's okay, because you're doing the mitzvah of self-care. You may have to take fruit that wasn't necessarily deemed kosher, or you may have to get like meat that's free range that's not necessarily deemed kosher. You're not in any way, I'm trying to think of a way to say violating your mitzvot, or in any way violating your faith. God understands, God wants you to do what's best for you and protect yourself and protect your mother. And so that's the other thing. So even if they're kosher normally, they may have different rules when they're in the hospital. So just asking, hi, I'm here to help you in any way I can. What's the best way I can help you?
Judaism centers almost exclusively around the concept that life is the most important thing. So kind of echoing what Rebecca was saying regarding the kosher food, or keeping with the commandments. We have 613 commandments. Not all of them are followable in modern time, but depending on a person's observance, they would likely be following as many of them as they could. But because we put this extreme emphasis on maintaining life, sometimes there are things that we have to do to stay alive that are counter to our mitzvot, or the commandments. But the most important thing, and whether or not it comes up for you, and I probably wouldn't remind somebody of this, but it's just for your own awareness, that there are things that we will do that would violate technically the commandments in order to stay alive. And that being encouraging of somebody who may be feeling stress about violating a commandment, but what you're doing is preserving life. And that's number one. That's the most important thing. Like even when we say like cheers in English, we say l'chaim, which means to life. That everything centers around life and preserving life.
And you'll see the chai, like
the little symbol. It looks like a pi, like the number pi. That's representing the number 18, which is indicative of life. That everything we do, even our symbols, center around life.
I was going to ask you that when you said the 18 doors. I was like, I wonder why 18. But I want to be conscious of our time. We could sit here and talk forever, but are there other questions? I want to make sure our studio audience has time to spark their curiosity. Well, this has been amazing. I'm so happy that you guys have been here with us. I'm going to give you each an opportunity to give us a final thought, because you don't want me to end this. You don't want to hear more of this. So I want to let each of you give us a final thought, something to send us off with, and then we will.
Thank you all for being here and taking the time to listen to us. And if you have any questions or anything like that, just let us know. And the biggest thing is just be who you are. You're here. Being here shows that you care. So that's what matters most.
I'm grateful to be part of the Wakeman family now, and thanks for all the support that you guys have provided us in a forum to talk.
I'm just happy to be here, and I guess my closing thought would be that Passover in Hebrew Pesach is a season of freedom, and that the work you do and the work that we do in our lives is all to promote not freedom just for ourselves, but freedom of all people, and freedom of spirit, but also freedom of mind. And I hope that that's, if you take away anything today, it's that Jews and people of the world should all be free in our own time.
Amen.
So thank you for coming to Voices of Passover. Shalom.
Shalom.
And have
Peace.
a wonderful